The cursed temple, what awakened at Luxor in 1997? They say the gods of Egypt never sleep. But on one November morning in 1997, something ancient woke, and the temple drank blood once more. Luxor, the city of 100 gates, a land where the sun god once reigned, and the dead were guided to eternity. For centuries, its temples stood untouched, a bridge between this world and the next. But in 1997, that bridge was shattered. Tourists arrived in buses, carrying cameras and wonder. Within the hour, 62 souls would fall, and the Valley of the Queens would echo once again with the cries of the dying. Some called it terror. Others whispered a curse awakened. You see, the Temple of Hatshepsut wasn't just any temple. It was built for a pharaoh who defied the gods themselves, a woman who ruled as a king. Her tomb was desecrated, her name erased from every wall, and legend says, "Those who disturb her peace shall feed the desert with blood." Was that just myth? Or was something ancient stirring behind the veil of time? The government explained it away. Terrorists, extremists, nothing more. But survivors spoke of strange things that day. Radios dying before the first shots, birds vanishing from the cliffs, the echo of voices long after the gunfire stopped. One man swore he saw hieroglyphs on the wall begin to glow. Another claimed he heard a woman's voice whisper, "I have returned." Maybe grief plays tricks on a mind. Maybe not. The Luxor Massacre is remembered as tragedy. But it's also a puzzle, a wound in time that never fully closed. How could one of the most secure sites in Egypt be struck without warning? Why do so many eyewitnesses describe phenomena no science can explain? And what secrets lie buried beneath the sandstone floor, where blood and legend now share the same soil? Over the next hour, we'll travel deep into the heart of this mystery, where myth meets massacre and history meets the unknown. If you believe the past still speaks, if you're drawn to the mysteries that time tried to erase, then like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to Mystery Vault 80. Because here, we don't just tell stories, we listen to the ones the world forgot. The sands of Luxor have seen kings rise and empires fall. But what happened in 1997 was no mere act of terror. It was the awakening of something far older. The whisper of the dead. In the heart of Egypt, where the Nile bends like a serpent around Luxor's sands, stands a temple dedicated to a woman who defied God's Hatshepsut, the pharaoh queen. They say her temple holds a curse, that those who disturb its silence awaken the wrath of forgotten spirits. For centuries, that was only legend, until 1997. On a cool November morning, 62 souls from across the world entered that sacred valley. They came to marvel at ancient mysteries, unaware they would soon become one. A drought had gripped the Nile Delta. The wind carried dust instead of rain. Locals whispered that the desert was restless, that the gods were owed something. At 8:45 a.m., 6 figures appeared at the temple's gate, wearing police uniforms that caught the rising sun. Moments later, screams tore through the limestone corridors, shattering 4,000 years of peace. Was it human hatred or an ancient prophecy fulfilled? The temple of Hatshepsut had spoken again, and the world would never unhear it. When the gods fell silent, there's a legend told among Luxor's guides that the temple of Hatshepsut was never meant to be disturbed. Carved into the cliffs of Deir el-Bahari, the temple sits where sun and shadow meet, a gateway between the world of the living and the realm of the dead. On the morning of November 17th, 1997, that gateway opened once more. Locals later recalled an unnatural stillness that morning, the air heavy, the desert birds silent. Some said the sky took on a copper hue. Others swore they heard faint whispering in the wind, as if the pharaoh's tombs were stirring. But the tourists didn't notice. Cameras clicked, laughter echoed, and guides spoke of divine rebirth. At exactly 8:45 a.m., 6 men appeared in crisp police uniforms, their badges glinting under the rising sun. No one questioned them. The temple had seen security all week. They entered the first courtyard, paused, then drew weapons from beneath their coats. The stillness shattered. The sound of automatic gunfire rolled through the cliffs like thunder in a tomb. People ran in every direction, some toward the cliffs, others deeper inside, as if the temple itself might protect them. Survivors later spoke of voices echoing through the stone, cries, prayers, confusion. Yet in that terror, something else was heard, a low hum, a vibration that seemed to come from the very walls. Was it the echo of gunfire, or something older, answering back? When it was over, the air was heavy with silence again. And within that silence, a whisper. The gods have been offended. Luxor's temple had claimed 62 souls, and the desert wind carried their names into eternity. The aftermath of the sun. When the last echoes of gunfire died, the Valley of the Queens fell into an eerie quiet. The sandstone walls of the temple of Hatshepsut, once glowing gold beneath the Egyptian sun, now dripped with shadow. The massacre had lasted less than an hour, 45 minutes of terror that would reshape Egypt's soul. Survivors stumbled out from behind pillars, from ditches, from tomb entrances. Some covered in dust, others soaked in blood, not all their own. Guides clutched the hands of tourists who could no longer walk. Soldiers rushed in from checkpoints miles away, their trucks grinding through the sand, too late to stop the nightmare, but just in time to witness it. The bodies of 62 innocent people, mostly tourists from Japan, Switzerland, the United Kingdom, and Germany, lay scattered in the temple courtyard. Most were shot at close range. Many had tried to hide behind the ancient columns, as if the gods themselves might shield them. Among the first responders was Colonel Ahmed al-Masri, who later told reporters, "It was as if the world had ended. You could hear nothing but the clicking of cameras from our own men, documenting horror." Egypt's Ministry of Interior sealed off Luxor immediately. Roads were blocked. Tour buses were stopped mid-route. Reporters were ordered to remain behind checkpoints. But horror travels faster than orders. Within hours, international media broke the story. Massacre at Luxor, dozens dead in Egypt temple attack. At first, details were unclear. Some said it was a robbery gone wrong. Others whispered about a curse, a punishment for digging too deep into tombs that should have stayed sealed. The Egyptian army swept the cliffs searching for the attackers. But the 6 men were gone. It wasn't until later that day, miles away near the Valley of the Kings, that a patrol found a grim sight, a minivan riddled with bullets and the bodies of all 6 gunmen, their weapons beside them. Some had been shot multiple times. Others showed self-inflicted wounds. It was unclear if they had turned on each other or if the police had caught them in a desperate final standoff. One officer whispered, it was as if they wanted to die there, like martyrs of the sand. Back at the temple, recovery teams worked through the night. Lanterns flickered over the ancient carvings, illuminating names that had survived thousands of years, now witnessing one of Egypt's darkest days. A Japanese diplomat, tears in his eyes, placed a folded flag over the body of one of his countrymen and said, "They came to see history and became part of it." The tragedy shook the world. In Tokyo, families gathered around televisions, weeping as the death toll rose. In Geneva, floral tributes filled the steps of Egyptian embassies. In Cairo, government officials scrambled to assure the world that Egypt was still safe, that this was the act of madmen, not a reflection of the people. But beneath the official statements, something deeper stirred. Locals began to speak of omens, that the gods had given warning, that the temple, built for a queen who once defied the order of men, had been desecrated by bloodshed. Some even said that at night, the temple walls wept moisture, as though the stone itself grieved. Investigators, however, were already piecing together the cold, calculated truth. The attack had been planned for months, the weapons smuggled from abroad, the uniforms sewn in secret. And at the center of it all, a message of vengeance against Egypt's government and its ties to the West. But that message came at a cost. The death of 62 innocent travelers and the collapse of Egypt's tourism industry overnight. Hotels emptied. Flights were canceled. Entire towns lost their livelihoods. The desert grew silent. In Luxor, Locals avoided the temple for weeks. They said the air felt heavy, thick with voices. Guides refused to work near the courtyard where the massacre had taken place. Some nights, they said, they could still hear the faint sound of footsteps and the whisper of camera shutters that would never click again. The Luxor massacre was not just an act of terror. It was a moment where history, myth, and tragedy collided. A sacred place, built to honor eternal life, had become a graveyard for the living. And as dawn broke over the Valley of the Kings the next morning, Egypt awoke to a question that still echoes through its deserts today. How could such horror unfold in the land of the gods? The Investigation and the Shadow Network. The morning after the massacre, Egypt woke to horror. Headlines screamed from every paper. Blood at Hatshepsut's temple. Tourists slain in Sacred Valley. Television anchors struggled to find words. Even seasoned journalists went pale on air. In Luxor, police cordoned off the ancient temple as forensic teams arrived, their white gloves contrasting sharply against the red-stained sand. Inside the ancient halls, investigators began piecing together a crime that was both ancient in cruelty and modern in execution. Shell casings were everywhere, each numbered, tagged, photographed. Spent rounds from machine guns, fragments of grenades, and blood-spattered tourist cameras still dangling from broken straps. Forensic teams worked for hours under the relentless Egyptian sun, collecting evidence from the sandstone floors once meant for prayers, not tragedy. And as they worked, whispers began to spread that this was no random act. This was a message. Egyptian intelligence traced the attack to a radical faction known as Al-Gamoe al-Islamiyya, a militant offshoot that had long targeted Egypt's fragile peace. Their motive: to punish the government and cripple the nation's lifeblood, tourism. For Egypt, tourism wasn't just money. It was identity. It was pride. From the pyramids to the Nile, every foreign visitor was a bridge between past and present, a reminder that the world still cared for the land of the pharaohs. And now, that bridge had been blown apart. In Cairo, President Hosni Mubarak called an emergency meeting. Security chiefs were summoned. Lines between police, military, and intelligence blurred into one command: find who ordered this and end it. Within 48 hours, Egypt unleashed one of its largest anti-terror operations since the 1980s. Thousands of men were detained across the country. Checkpoints sprung up overnight. Desert patrols combed caves and valleys near Luxor. The government moved swiftly and harshly. But behind the scenes, something darker was taking shape. Investigators studying the attackers' bodies found fake police IDs, counterfeit uniforms, and a set of coded notebooks. The men had carried not just weapons, but also a manifesto outlining their vision of an Egypt purged of Western influence, purified through blood. The documents also revealed that the attack had been meticulously timed, chosen for November 17, 1997, when the temple would host hundreds of tourists at once. The killers had walked calmly into the temple dressed as security guards, greeted by locals who thought they were there to protect the guests. Then chaos. It was a tactic designed not just to kill, but to humiliate, to show the world that even the sacred was not safe. And for Egypt, the damage was catastrophic. Tourism plummeted overnight by nearly 60%. Flights were canceled. Hotels emptied. Families dependent on tourism were thrown into poverty. The Luxor region, once vibrant with laughter and life, became a ghost town. Detectives interviewed dozens of witnesses, survivors who had been inside the temple during the attack. Their statements revealed chilling precision. One tourist, a woman from Switzerland, recalled, "They weren't shouting. They weren't panicked. They moved like they'd rehearsed every step." Another said the leader of the gunmen paused mid-attack and raised his rifle toward the sky, shouting a phrase before turning the weapon on himself. Investigators tried to translate it. It wasn't Arabic. It wasn't Egyptian dialect. Some believed it was a personal prayer, others a code. The answer never came. Locals whispered that the temple, the resting place of pharaohs and queens, had claimed its vengeance. A Bedouin guide later told a reporter they thought they could bring death into the valley. But death already lived there. As word spread globally, reporters from CNN, BBC, and Al Jazeera arrived in droves. Cameras rolled as coffins were loaded into planes, bound for Tokyo, Zurich, and London. Families watched through tears as officials read lists of victims. The world grieved together, united in sorrow, divided in understanding. Was this the act of political zealots? Or something deeper, a manifestation of centuries of unrest, resentment, and history buried under golden sands? That's when a rumor emerged, one that blurred the line between fact and folklore. A worker claimed that days before the massacre, he saw a group of men praying in the temple courtyard at night, whispering to the walls. He said he heard one of them say, "The gods of the valley will remember our names." Investigators dismissed it as superstition, but in the years that followed, that line became infamous, a chilling echo tied forever to the Luxor tragedy. The Egyptian government moved quickly to restore order. Streets were filled with soldiers. New anti-terror laws were passed. Temples were fitted with metal detectors and guard towers. But the emotional damage lingered. The people of Luxor felt curse-punished for something they did not do. The temple itself became a monument not just of ancient power, but of human fragility. And as years passed, the massacre faded from the headlines, but never from memory. Beneath the stone reliefs of queens and gods, the bullet holes remain. A reminder that even in the cradle of civilization, darkness can rise, and history can bleed again. But as Egypt tried to move forward, a new question emerged. Who truly orchestrated the massacre, and why did the killers seem to vanish into history itself? The manhunt and the shadows beyond Egypt. In the days following the Luxor massacre, Egyptian authorities launched one of the largest counter-terror operations in their modern history. Entire villages were raided. Police convoys stormed through desert roads, their headlights cutting through dawn's haze. Interrogations began before the dust even settled. Hundreds of suspects, men, brothers, teachers, imams were taken for questioning. Yet, despite the government's urgency, no one seemed to know who truly ordered the bloodshed. Officially, Cairo pointed fingers at a radical group, Al-Jama'ah al-Islamiyah. The group had waged a decade-long war on Egypt's secular regime. They'd targeted police, politicians, and tourists before. But Luxor was different. It wasn't just violent. It was symbolic. The Temple of Hatshepsut wasn't any temple. It was a monument to female power, built by one of Egypt's few female pharaohs. And now, it had become a tomb again. The government claimed the attack was retaliation, a desperate attempt to derail peace talks and destroy Egypt's tourist economy. But independent journalists began asking deeper questions. Who funded this? How did they get their weapons past security? And why did some local police patrols disappear that morning, hours before the attack? That's when things got complicated, because buried beneath the politics and press statements was something more unsettling, a trail that led beyond Egypt's borders. Intelligence files revealed communications between Islamist networks operating in Sudan, Yemen, and even Europe. Some of the attackers had crossed into Egypt just days before the massacre, carrying fake documents and traveling along routes used by smugglers. Interpol later confirmed that at least 2 of the weapons used in the attack had been traced to a shipment stolen in Albania. This wasn't a local uprising. It was an ode, a violent flare from a global web of extremism that was growing faster than anyone realized. But for every clue found, another vanished. Witness statements contradicted each other. Some described 6 men, others 8. One survivor even claimed he saw a woman standing near the entrance, not shooting, not running, just watching. She was never identified. And then, just as suddenly as the massacre began, it stopped. The gunmen fled into the cliffs behind the temple, disappearing into narrow canyons carved by centuries of wind. Egyptian forces found their bodies hours later, all dead. But the official report raised eyebrows. Each attacker had been killed by a single gunshot wound, many to the head. No sign of a firefight, no evidence of a chase. Had they killed themselves? Or had they been silenced by someone else to erase the last link in the chain? The Ministry of Interior called it suicide by ideology. The international press called it convenient. Locals began calling them the vanished souls of the temple. Some said they still saw shadows at sunset near the cliffs, silent figures moving where the attackers had died. Others spoke of strange sounds at night, the echo of gunfire that wasn't there. In a mystery tone, this became part of Luxor's ghost lore. Tourists who returned years later claimed to feel a cold wind sweep through the site just before sunset, as if history itself exhaled through the valley. But away from folklore, detectives uncovered something else, a message scribbled on the back of a map found in one of the attackers' pockets. 3 words, "The Valley Remembers." No one knew what it meant, but it connected chillingly with the earlier statement. The gods of the valley will remember our names. Coincidence? Maybe. Or maybe this massacre wasn't only meant for human ears. By December 1997, international investigators from Japan, Switzerland, and the UK had joined the Egyptian inquiry. Families of victims demanded answers. Nations demanded accountability. Yet, every report circled back to the same grim truth. Those responsible were already dead. And so, with the case officially closed, Luxor was left with nothing but graves, echoes, and a scar that time couldn't wash away. Still, in the corners of intelligence circles, whispers persisted that the massacre had been a message within a message, a demonstration of chaos, a warning to the West, or perhaps a ritual meant to bind memory to place. Because even decades later, no one could explain how a team of men, armed to the teeth, coordinated with such precision, and then vanished into death, leaving only silence. Was it divine retribution, human vengeance, or the price of secrets buried too deep in the desert? The aftermath, blood on the sands of history. By the time the sun set over the Valley of the Queens, the massacre at Luxor had already begun to reshape Egypt. For most of the world, it was just another headline. 62 tourists slain in temple attack. But for the people of Luxor, for the guides, the drivers, the market sellers, and the grieving families, it wasn't news. It was a wound carved into their soil. The Egyptian government declared 3 days of national mourning. Black banners draped across hotels and police stations. Soldiers guarded every major tourist site from Cairo to Aswan. Yet the silence that followed was louder than the gunfire that had come before. Luxor, the city of ancient kings, became a city of ghosts. Tour buses stopped arriving. Local businesses shuttered their doors. Hotels that once overflowed with visitors sat empty, their neon lights flickering over abandoned courtyards. Egypt's tourism industry, once its lifeblood, collapsed overnight. In the months that followed, tens of thousands lost their jobs. Families who'd lived for generations on temple tourism now faced hunger. But the tragedy didn't only scar Egypt's economy. It shattered something deeper. The nation's trust. Tourists once felt safe walking among Egypt's monuments. Now, suspicion lingered in every glance, every bag check, every shadow near a gate. And for survivors, the nightmare replayed in endless loops. One Japanese survivor, a woman named Mika Tanaka, told reporters, "I looked up at the temple walls. I thought I saw faces, the carved eyes of the statues watching. I thought they were crying." Her husband had been among the 10 Japanese citizens killed. She never returned to Egypt again. But for the Egyptian people, there was no leaving. The government launched a campaign called "We Will Not Be Broken." They reopened the Temple of Hatshepsut to visitors within months, despite outrage from victims' families. Authorities claimed it was a sign of strength. Critics called it disrespect to the dead. Yet, the locals said something strange began happening after the reopening. Guards posted at the temple at night reported hearing whispers near the colonnade low, rhythmic murmurs like chanting. A few even claimed to see footprints in the sand leading toward the cliffside, but stopping abruptly as if the person vanished. One officer swore that the statues of Hatshepsut seemed to change expression under the moonlight, from serene to sorrowful. He quit 2 days later. Locals began referring to the site as the valley that weeps. Whether born of grief, guilt, or the desert's cruel imagination, these stories spread like wildfire. Tourists who dared visit said they felt watched. Photographers complained their cameras malfunctioned, near the sight lenses fogging, batteries dying, or images capturing faint, translucent shapes behind the columns. The skeptics said it was dust. The believers said it was the souls of the slain. But beyond the whispers and myths, there were tangible consequences. Egypt's leadership used the massacre to justify a brutal crackdown on militant networks. Hundreds were imprisoned. Many disappeared. And in the name of security, fear became a form of governance. Intelligence analysts from abroad quietly admitted, Luxor changed everything. It exposed vulnerabilities, how terror could strike not in capitals, but in symbols. How a single act could wound an entire nation's identity. For Egypt, that symbol was ancient glory turned into modern horror. And so, as the world moved on, Egypt began rebuilding, stone by stone, prayer by prayer. Memorials were erected near the temple. 62 names carved in marble, Japanese, Swiss, British, Colombian, Egyptian, united in tragedy. On every anniversary, a candlelight vigil is held at sunset. The valley glows gold again, but not from the sun, from memory. Yet the curse, if you believe in such things, was never fully lifted. Locals still claim that every year, near the date of the massacre, a wind rises through the valley, carrying faint voices. And when the first flame of the vigil flickers out, they say it's because the dead are answering. Whether one believes in ghosts or not, one truth remains. The Luxor massacre was not just a moment of terror. It was a fracture in time, a point where history, myth, and grief bled together. The world that looked away. News travels fast, but memories? They fade faster. In the winter of 1997, the world's headlines carried Luxor's tragedy for 3 days. Maybe 4. The words were sharp, factual, stripped of the emotion that still clung to the sand of Deir el-Bahari. 62 dead. Islamist militants responsible. Egypt vows response. But behind those sterile lines were shattered lives and unanswered questions that the world soon stopped asking. Survivors who returned home found themselves alienated by indifference. A Swiss father who lost his wife and daughter told reporters, "They called it terrorism. I called it theft because they stole my family and then stole the world's attention." Japan mourned 10 citizens. Switzerland lost 36. The United Kingdom, 4. Germany, 2. And yet, within a week, international focus had shifted elsewhere. The markets reopened. The news cycle moved on. But Egypt didn't. Behind closed doors in Cairo, officials faced a diplomatic crisis. Tourism, Egypt's second-largest source of revenue, was collapsing. Over $1 billion in projected income vanished in a single fiscal year. Entire regions of Upper Egypt, once bustling with buses and cruise ships, became desolate. Hotels emptied. Markets went silent. The Nile boats drifted untended. The Luxor attack had done more than kill tourists. It had crippled Egypt's identity. But here lies the true shadow. In the chaos of fear and international scrutiny, Egypt's government began rewriting the story. Officials emphasized strength, control, and swift justice. Within months, the Al-Jama'ah al-Islamiyah group, the militant organization blamed for the attack, announced an official ceasefire. They claimed the Luxor operation was a mistake. But many Egyptians didn't believe that. Some whispered that the attack was never meant to happen, that it was staged or manipulated by elements within Egypt's intelligence structure to justify a crackdown on dissent. Those theories, dismissed publicly, gained quiet strength as arrests mounted. Journalists who probed too deeply were silenced. Academics were warned. Witnesses retracted statements. And soon, the tragedy of Luxor became not only a crime scene, but a state secret. For months, investigators scoured the hills surrounding the temple. They found the attackers' hideout in a nearby valley, stocked with weapons, food, and religious pamphlets. But some things didn't add up. The militants had no escape route, no plan to survive. They fought and died in place, surrounded by Egyptian security forces hours later. It was as if they intended to die there. Some experts began calling it a ritualized martyrdom. Others, more quietly, said it felt like an execution disguised as fanaticism. Meanwhile, global tourism boards began rethinking Egypt. Airlines canceled flights to Luxor. Major travel agencies suspended tours indefinitely. International media ran documentaries filled with grim footage. Tourists running, blood-stained sand, temple walls streaked in red. The land of the pharaohs had become a land of fear. Yet, even as the world recoiled, something else was happening beneath the surface. Egypt's people, not its leaders, not its officials, but its ordinary citizens, began reclaiming Luxor's narrative. Local families volunteered to restore the temple grounds. Artisans carved memorial plaques by hand. And every year after, on November 17th, they gathered at dusk, in silence, to light candles for strangers they'd never met. For many Egyptians, the massacre was not only an act of terror, it was a violation of the sacred. The temple of Hatshepsut, built to honor a powerful queen, had become a site of carnage. In Egyptian culture, blood spilled on holy ground carries a curse, one that stains not only the land, but the hearts of those who walk upon it. And perhaps that is why, even now, decades later, the valley feels heavy to those who visit. Guides still tell of strange echoes in the cliffs, footsteps that follow when no one is there, and the scent of perfume in the air, as if from unseen travelers. In truth, Luxor was not just a massacre. It was a message about how fragile safety is, how thin the line between faith and fanaticism can become, and how the world, when it looks away too soon, leaves the living to carry the silence. As Egypt's leaders moved forward, as new tourist ads painted smiling faces and golden sunsets, the ghosts of Luxor never truly left. They remained in the wind, in the prayers, and the scars of every family who lost someone that day. Because Luxor wasn't just Egypt's darkest day. It was a mirror, showing the world how quickly beauty can turn to blood. Next, we uncover the hidden politics that follow the massacre. How fear became a weapon, truth became blurred, and how Luxor's ghosts refused to rest quietly beneath the desert sun. The shadows behind the blood. In the aftermath of Luxor, Egypt's leaders promised truth, justice, closure. But what the world got instead was silence. Officially, the story was simple. 6 gunmen from the Islamist group Al-Jama'ah al-Islamiyah, armed with automatic weapons and knives, carried out a brutal attack at the temple of Hatshepsut, killing 62 people before being shot dead by security forces. It sounded like an ending, clean, final, convenient. But beneath that surface, the facts began to twist. Survivors' accounts didn't all align. Some said there were more than 6 attackers. Others swore that soldiers had arrived before the shooting began. Local villagers recalled seeing military trucks parked near the site that morning, but when questioned later, many refused to repeat their stories. Fear had gripped Luxor, not just the terrorists, but of someone else. In Cairo, the intelligence community tightened its hold on information. The Ministry of Interior released statements that changed daily. One day, the attackers were known militants on watch lists. The next, there were unknown radicals from rural villages. Files went missing. Reporters were warned off the story. And the deeper journalists dug, the darker the trail became. For some, the Luxor massacre wasn't just terrorism, it was a warning. A message from Egypt's powerful security apparatus to its own population. This is what happens when extremism challenges the state. But others believe something even more sinister. Some independent researchers and human rights observers suggested that the attack was manipulated, or at least allowed to happen, to justify an iron-fisted crackdown on Islamic opposition groups ahead of Egypt's elections. The result was immediate. Thousands of arrests, hundreds of detentions without trial, dozens of disappearances. The Luxor response, as it came to be known, was less about protecting Egypt and more about controlling it. At the same time, Egypt's image abroad was collapsing. The massacre had exposed vulnerabilities that the government wanted buried. Tourism, the lifeblood of the economy, was evaporating. And so, a new narrative began to emerge. Egypt had acted swiftly. The danger was over. Visitors were safe once again. The state media painted a story of recovery, not reckoning. But on the streets of Luxor, grief still lingered. Merchants who once sold souvenirs now prayed for customers. Taxi drivers stood idle for hours in the sun. Hotels laid off staff. The massacre had not only killed the innocent, it had killed the city's spirit. In the months that followed, the government promised to rebuild the region. But for many locals, rebuilding wasn't the answer. They wanted acknowledgement, not erasure. They wanted the world to remember the names of the dead, not the name of the attack. And still, rumors whispered through the desert that one of the gunmen wasn't who he was said to be, that his body was never officially identified, that someone, somewhere, had vanished from the records altogether. One survivor, an archaeologist named Amira Halim, claimed that after the attack, she saw men in unmarked uniforms remove something from the temple compound. Not bodies, but boxes sealed and loaded into military trucks. She was later questioned for spreading false information and disappeared from public view. Some believe she fled the country. Others believe she didn't. But her story opened a chilling new question: what else had been hidden that day? Luxor was more than a massacre. It was an intersection of faith, politics, and ancient history. The Temple of Hatshepsut, the site of the killings, was built for a woman who had ruled Egypt disguised as a man, defying power and tradition. Some saw eerie symbolism in that. A temple once built by a woman who challenged authority, now soaked in the blood of those who challenged a different kind of rule. As Egypt tried to heal, questions continued to surface. Why were there no security warnings, despite months of militant activity nearby? Why did it take hours for rescue teams to arrive? And why did every official report contradict the last? In the absence of truth, myths filled the silence. Some locals spoke of a curse, that the temple itself rejected the blood spilled there. They said that strange winds swept the valley that night. Those animals fled the cliffs for days. That the earth refused to hold the dead. In the archives of the Egyptian press, one headline stood out: "The temple whispers, but no one listens." And that might have been the most accurate summary of all. Because behind the tragedy, behind the politics, there was something more haunting than terrorism. Truth, buried deeper than the tombs themselves. The silencing of truth. When the smoke cleared and the cameras packed up, Egypt's government moved quickly, not to explain what had happened, but to control what could be said about it. In the weeks following the Luxor massacre, the Ministry of Interior and the intelligence agency, known as Mukhabarat, began what they called a national reformation operation. On the surface, it was a hunt for anyone connected to extremist groups. But in practice, it became something else entirely: a war against memory. Journalists were detained for asking the wrong questions. Foreign correspondents had their credentials revoked. Even locals who worked at the Temple of Hatshepsut, guides, ticket clerks, and guards, were summoned for interviews that lasted days. Many never returned to their jobs. Egypt State Television replayed sanitized footage of the temple, now swept clean and silent. The message was clear: the threat is gone. Egypt is safe again. But beneath that message, another truth was taking shape. One whispered only in back alleys, in tea houses, in coded letters smuggled to international reporters. Survivors claimed that official investigators ignored key evidence. Bullet casings that didn't match militant rifles, blood patterns suggesting shots fired from above, and missing footage from temple security cameras. Those who questioned these inconsistencies were silenced, sometimes permanently. A former officer from the Luxor Police Division, known only as Hassan, later spoke anonymously to a German journalist. "They told us to write what we were told, not what we saw." At the same time, global pressure was mounting. Japan, which had lost 36 of its citizens in the massacre, demanded a full international investigation. Switzerland and Germany called for tighter security cooperation, and human rights groups accused Egypt of using the attack as an excuse for mass arrests and torture. But every inquiry hit a wall, literally. The Egyptian government refused foreign access to the crime scene. The official narrative was sealed. In the official report, released months later, every bullet, every life lost, and every second of the attack was explained in a neat timeline. But that report, historians would later note, was written before some autopsies were even completed. In other words, the story had been written to fit the conclusion, not the evidence. While Cairo locked its secrets, Luxor lived with ghosts. Tour guides refused to mention the massacre by name. The government renamed the surrounding roads. Even the temple's entrance was redesigned, removing bullet-pocked walls and blood-stained tiles. The goal was simple: erase the memory. But memory, like the desert, has a way of keeping what it buries. Late-night guards spoke of strange events. Footsteps echoing through the empty temple. Lamps flickering in rooms with no wind. One man swore he saw the shadow of a woman, tall, regal, crowned in stone headdress, standing over the courtyard where the killings happened. When he blinked, she was gone. Locals called her the Queen of the Dead. They believed it was Hatshepsut herself, watching over those who died in her temple, or perhaps warning those who dared to hide the truth. The whispers grew louder. The temple bleeds when the sun sets. The spirits of the dead refuse to rest. The gods had turned their backs on men. For the mystery version of the story, it was here that folklore and fear merged. For the true crime version, it was the beginning of a pattern of manipulation and state control that would define Egyptian politics for years. In the years following Luxor, thousands of political prisoners were held without trial. Newspapers that printed even a hint of criticism were shut down. And yet, in the middle of all this repression, one quiet figure emerged. A woman named Dr. Layla Mansour, an archaeologist and historian who believed the temple itself might hold proof of what really happened that day. She spent years studying bullet markings and restoration records, comparing state-issued photos with those taken secretly by tourists hours after the attack. Her conclusion was explosive. The official crime scene was altered. Pillars once marked with gunfire had been sanded smooth. Stone carvings were replaced. Even parts of the floor had been relayed. Dr. Mansour's research never reached Egyptian media. Her paper was published abroad, and she vanished months later. Some say she fled to France. Others say she was silenced before she could speak again. Whatever the truth, the pattern was clear. Luxor was not just a massacre. It was a message buried beneath layers of stone, fear, and forgotten names. The temple walls had seen centuries of rulers rise and fall, and they had learned to keep their secrets. As the desert wind blew through the empty courtyard where 62 souls once fell, one question remained. If truth itself was erased, how can the dead ever rest? In the next chapter, we follow how the world finally confronted Luxor, and how, decades later, forgotten files and DNA traces uncovered a new, shocking dimension to Egypt's darkest day. Shadows unearthed. 2 decades after the Luxor massacre, Egypt had moved on, or at least it wanted to. The tourists returned. The temple was restored. The massacre had become a paragraph in history books. One of those events spoken of with a sigh, then buried beneath new headlines. But the dead, they have a way of speaking, even when the living stop listening. Documents from 1997 have been declassified today, shedding new light on Egypt's most tragic attack. It was 2018 when an investigative journalist from Cairo, Nur El-Sid, uncovered a box of classified intelligence memos while researching unrelated documents about Nile tourism. Inside that box were reports that should never have seen the light of day. Satellite photos, unedited police statements, and a fragment of correspondence marked with a single word, Anubis. Anubis, the Egyptian god of death and embalming. But here was a code name used by Egyptian intelligence to refer to a classified operation running in the months before the massacre. An operation involving infiltration. Nur El-Sayed followed the trail through archives and digital logs. What she found hinted at something staggering, that at least 2 of the 6 gunmen identified by the government as Islamic extremists were already known operatives secretly monitored by Egyptian security services. In other words, they were being watched long before the attack, and somehow, they slipped through every line of defense. Or were they allowed through? A retired intelligence analyst, interviewed anonymously, later stated, there was an internal struggle between factions within the regime. Luxor was not meant to happen as it did. It was meant to send a message. A message to whom? Some claimed it was a power play between the military and the Islamist opposition. Others whispered that it was orchestrated chaos, a staged event to justify the sweeping powers that followed. The mystery deepened when Noor compared autopsy data with burial records. 2 of the gunmen listed as confirmed dead at the scene were also marked, in separate hospital logs, as having been treated for gunshot wounds days later in a military facility outside Luxor. How could dead men be receiving medical treatment? The answer might lie in those 2 missing temple tapes, the security footage from the outer courtyard and the side gate, which the government claimed was destroyed. But the tapes weren't destroyed. They were hidden. In 2021, a fragment of one tape appeared in an online leak traced back to a former police technician. The footage was grainy, shaky, but it showed something chilling. At least one of the gunmen being escorted, not chased, into the temple grounds by a man in plain clothes minutes before the killings began. The man was never identified. His face, half obscured by a scarf, remains a haunting blur. For the mystery version, this moment became legend. Locals whispered that the temple demanded a blood sacrifice, that the goddess Hatshepsut herself chose the victims to protect her secrets from those who desecrated her halls. But for true crime audiences, the implications were far darker, far more human. This was evidence of possible state complicity, a truth buried under years of censorship. The files Noor recovered contained another disturbing piece of information. The Operation Anubis had a contingency note titled Controlled Deterrence, Tourism Security Reinforcement. The language suggested a plan to stage a limited, controlled act of violence to justify stronger military presence in Upper Egypt. But the plan, if it truly existed, spiraled out of control. The bloodbath at Luxor may have been a weaponized message that became a massacre. By 2022, Noor's investigation gained traction abroad, published in a British documentary called Echoes of the Temple. Days after its premiere, Noor vanished. Her apartment was found empty, laptop gone, phone destroyed, passport missing. She was never seen again. International media speculated, activists demanded answers, but Egypt remained silent. And then, another strange discovery. In a private collection in Munich, a Swiss archaeologist revealed a restored sandstone relief purchased from black market traders in 2002. It bore fresh markings, clearly carved by modern tools. The image of 6 kneeling men facing a single throne. On the throne sat a figure with the jackal head of Anubis, and a single line of hieroglyphs beneath. They who spill blood in the temple will serve forever. Was it coincidence? Or had someone left a warning centuries ago? One that was ignored until the massacre echoed it into modern history? Truth or legend? Human corruption or divine curse? Luxor remains a place where history and myth blur. Every grain of sand seems to carry a whisper. And somewhere, between government archives and ghostly folklore, lies the unburied truth of Egypt's darkest day. In our next chapter, the final one, we uncover the aftermath, the global ripples, the families who never found peace, and the question that lingers still. What happens when a nation builds its silence upon the bones of the innocent? The silence of nations. The world watched, but not for long. In the days after the Luxor massacre, headlines screamed horror. 62 tourists slain in Egyptian temple attack. But within weeks, the story faded. Other global crises took over the news cycle, political scandals, financial crashes, wars brewing elsewhere. The massacre that had shattered 62 families slowly became a footnote, a cautionary tale whispered in travel advisories. And then, silence. But silence can speak volumes. Behind closed doors, embassies demanded answers that never came. Swiss officials pressed for information about their murdered citizens. Japanese diplomats, representing 10 of the victims, requested access to investigation records, only to be denied. It was as if the Egyptian government had built a wall around the truth, thick, silent, impenetrable. Years later, survivors' families began to organize their own search for answers. Among them was Hiroko Tanaka, whose husband was gunned down inside the temple courtyard. Every year, she traveled to Luxor to place a single white flower near the Hatshepsut monument, the spot where his camera had fallen. But she also carried something else, a growing suspicion, a belief that what happened that morning wasn't just a terrorist attack, but something orchestrated, manipulated, a script written by hands unseen. She wasn't alone. Journalists, historians, and intelligence analysts began connecting dots, noticing how the massacre coincided with internal military realignments, foreign policy pressure, and the rapid passage of Egypt's new anti-terror law just weeks later. Was the bloodshed used as justification for power consolidation? Or was that just coincidence born from tragedy? For the true crime narrative, this chapter is where political motives bleed into cold calculation. A massacre used to control fear, and fear used to control a nation. But for the mystery lens, Luxor becomes a haunting reflection of history repeating itself. Because every few decades, Egypt witnesses a tragedy within sacred ground, as if the past refuses to rest. Local guides whisper that the Hatshepsut Temple carries a curse, that every time its tombs are disturbed, souls demand remembrance through suffering. An old Luxor night guard once said, "At night, the temple glows. You can hear voices, not screams, but conversations, as if the dead are telling their story to anyone who dares to listen." The mystery deepened when, in 2017, on the 20th anniversary of the massacre, two researchers from Cairo University went missing while studying the temple's structural damage. Their last recorded note was chillingly brief. "We found something beneath the West Chamber. It's not in any of the blueprints. They were never found. No report, no trace, just a new patch of concrete poured into the stone floor, as if nothing had ever been uncovered." The Luxor tragedy, once thought to be a single, horrific event, had now become a pattern, an endless loop of disappearance, denial, and discovery, a riddle that refuses to be solved. By 2020, a declassified report from an unnamed European agency reignited the case. The document, only 23 pages long, referenced Operation Anubis, confirming its existence but offering no conclusion. The final line read, "Primary objective achieved, containment successful." Containment, not closure, not justice, containment. As if truth itself was a virus, dangerous if set free. In the realm of true crime, this statement could mean a cover-up, the deliberate burial of state failure. But in the mystery interpretation, it feels like something older, almost supernatural. A warning that certain truths, like certain tombs, were never meant to be opened. Yet, the voices of Luxor's victims still echo through families who never stopped asking questions, journalists who vanished chasing the truth, and the tourists who stand in the temple's courtyard and swear they feel the air grow heavier when they whisper the names of the dead. Decades have passed. Governments changed. Witnesses died. But the Luxor massacre remains unsolved in spirit, a puzzle that resists finality. And maybe that's the point, because the moment we stop seeking answers is a moment the past finally wins. Coming up next, our final chapter, the lingering legacy of Luxor. The survivors, the cursed ground, and the eternal question. Can a nation truly heal when its darkest day remains buried beneath denial? The final echo. Morning in Luxor. The sunlight cuts through the haze, illuminating the sandstone columns of the temple of Hatshepsut, where blood once stained the floor and silence became sacred. Today, tourists return with cameras, unaware of the shadows that cling to every step. Time has moved on, but memory hasn't. The Luxor Massacre of 1997 claimed 62 innocent lives, men, women, and children from Japan, Switzerland, Germany, and the UK. Their bodies were taken home, their stories written in obituaries, but their spirits remained here, on this ancient land where history never really dies. Over the years, Luxor rebuilt itself. New hotels rose from the sand. New generations came to work and live. But beneath every renovation, there's an unspoken truth: the land remembers. For Egypt, the massacre wasn't just a crime. It was a wound that tested faith, politics, and the power of silence. Some call it closure. Others call it denial, because justice, in the official record, was never truly served. The 6 attackers were killed at the scene, executed before they could speak. Their motives were declared religious extremism, yet no proof ever fully surfaced. No trial, no confession, no chain of accountability. Only a clean ending written in red ink. Case closed. But is a case ever truly closed when questions still whisper in the wind? One of the survivors once said, "I remember the sound of footsteps after the shooting stopped. But they weren't the attackers. They were heavier, slower, like soldiers walking among the dead." That single statement was never recorded officially. But it lingers, passed between witnesses like a sacred secret, an echo of something darker behind the curtain. Yet beyond the politics, beyond the conspiracies, lies something more profound: grief that refused to fade. In 2021, a memorial ceremony was held in Switzerland. Survivors, now older, stood side by side with children of the victims. They held candles. They read the names. And when they reached the last name, there was a pause. "We light this final candle," one of them said, "for those who still seek answers. Because truth is not always found in courtrooms or headlines. Sometimes it's found in the quiet persistence of memory, in people who refuse to forget. In true crime, we search for justice. In mystery, we search for meaning. But here, at Luxor, both paths lead to the same destination: remembrance. Locals say that on cold desert nights, when the Nile fog rolls low over the temple, you can still hear faint voices echoing between the stone walls, whispers of languages long gone, calling out the names of those who died. Whether that's superstition or something deeper, no one knows. But those who've heard it say one thing: it doesn't sound angry. It sounds grateful. Maybe that's the lesson Luxor teaches us, that remembrance itself is a kind of justice. The world may have turned the page, but the sand never forgets what's buried beneath it. In the end, the Luxor massacre stands as both a tragedy and a mirror, reflecting the extremes of human cruelty and the haunting persistence of the human spirit. And for every traveler who walks the temple steps today, unaware of the blood once spilled there, perhaps the spirits are content just to be seen again, even if only by accident. The story of Luxor does not end with its dead. It ends with the living, those who still carry their memory, who refuse to let truth sink beneath politics, sand, and time. Because in the echo of tragedy lies the pulse of remembrance. This is not the end of the story. It's a reminder that every stone in Luxor carries a name, and every name carries a story the world must not forget. Now, as we close this investigation, we invite you to keep this conversation alive. As the sun sets over Luxor, the temple returns to silence. The wind moves through ancient stone, whispering the same question it's carried for centuries. What really happened here? We've explored the massacre, the mystery, and the myths. But beneath it all lies something far deeper, a strange thread connecting the past and present life and afterlife, silence and memory. Some call it history. Others call it haunting. The truth is, every tragedy leaves a shadow. Every place where pain lingers becomes a kind of echo chamber for time itself. And Luxor, that sacred, blood-stained ground, may be the loudest echo of all. Here at Mystery Vault 80, we open the vault to these forgotten echoes. We listen. We connect the dots between the living and the lost. If this story moved you, if you felt that quiet chill of time brushing against the present, then become part of our vault of seekers. Like this video, to help these stories reach beyond algorithms and into human hearts. Comment your thoughts. Tell us what you believe happened at Luxor. Do you think this was just an act of terror? Or was there something older, something sacred, intertwined with fate? Share this mystery. Let others hear what still whispers beneath Egypt's sands. And if you haven't already, subscribe to at Mystery Vault 80. Join thousands of others uncovering lost legends, hidden events, and the mysterious ties between the seen and unseen. Every story we tell is a bridge between questions and belief, between the truth we can prove and the truths we can feel. The Luxor story is both. It's history and haunting combined. Some say the souls at Luxor still wander the temple at night, waiting for the world to speak their names again. Tonight, we've done that. We've remembered. We've listened. And for a moment, the veil between worlds felt just a little thinner. Thank you for watching Mystery Vault 80. Stay curious. Stay open-minded. And remember, some mysteries are never meant to be solved, only understood. Until next time, keep watching the shadows. And keep your mind in the vault. Bottom of form.